Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here, and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we have my Game Week 6 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the GW6 deadline and discuss them to the best of my ability, and also round up the press conferences as well. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, as always, let's start the video with those key press conference updates as of Friday afternoon at 3 PM. And as I always say, we do get news throughout Friday going into Saturday. So do tune into the deadline stream tomorrow where I can wrap up any extra news that we get throughout Friday and going into Saturday morning. And also make sure to subscribe to see more content as well. So we got a lot of press conference updates, which is good, some key information. But sadly, someone that was, as always, not particularly clear was Arteta on David Raya. We didn't expect him to be clear. I actually go as far as saying with both Raya and Eddie Howe, and sorry to both of them because I regularly have beef with them in every video where I talk about press conferences. But Arteta and Howe, I actually would go as far as saying, and it's not even a joke when I say it, I would go for the opposite of whatever they say. Whenever Arteta has said that Saka is injured, he's fit. Whenever he says that he's fit, he's injured. And the same with Ødegaard. As soon as he said Ødegaard might be available, I was like, he's injured. If he'd have said Ødegaard was injured, I think he's available. So he didn't actually say anything specific on Raya. What he said, the full quote, was we have to wait 24 hours to see if it is looking good or not. It's not about risk. It is about a player being fit or available. We will make a decision tomorrow. For what it's worth, and this could he could be out for 6 months or fit tomorrow. I've got no idea. For what it's worth, this tells me, if we do take it at face value, I think he'll be fit and available. And if he's not, it doesn't look long term. So on a wildcard, I would still be comfortable taking the risk by picking Raya. But you do need to realise that there is a chance, if we don't get news, that Raya is injured longer term and you've, on a wildcard, chosen a goalkeeper that you've got to replace immediately. I've seen some people suggest, what about Raya and a backup 4.5 like Verbruggen or Flecken? That is so much money to spend on keepers. At that stage, just don't go for David Raya and go for Saliba instead and just go for a cheap goalkeeper. Like, I don't like the idea of going for Raya and a backup goalkeeper. It's just so much money. So yeah, I would either take the risk or just maybe go for a Saliba and a Gabriel, or switch it up and go for a Kai Havertz, Saka and Gabriel triple up, which isn't very popular, but I really like. So sadly, I can't give you much more on Raya yet. But again, tune into the deadline stream because we might get more information tomorrow. Timber and White both train. Lots of people asking, is Timber an option? I don't mind him. He does. I would never say nailed with anyone other than like Gabriel and Saliba. Even Ben White now doesn't look nailed. But Timber has looked relatively nailed on. And I would say I would go as far as saying he might be my third favourite defender, even ahead of someone like a Ben White. So, yeah, I like Timber. He's obviously a little bit cheaper, but it's just not worth the additional risk at the moment. Maybe later on in the season, after he started like 15 games in a row or something like that, then we'd start to say, yeah, maybe he is. But I don't have enough information right now to say that he's nailed. And Marino is close, which is really good for a couple of reasons. It might mean once Marino's back, Havertz gets pushed to the 9, because they could play like Jorginho, Partey, Marino, and it could be that Havertz is pushed forward. But also, this is just good for Arsenal in general, that the player that they've spent some money on to bolster up their midfield is finally very close. Doesn't sound like Marino will be available for Game Week 6, though. So that is it on Arsenal. I'd probably be willing to take the risk on Raya, but that is just my opinion. I don't know anything. On Isak, Eddie Howe said that he will be a doubt for tomorrow. He hasn't trained yet, so we will have to make a decision on him. He said I honestly think it might be word for word. This exact quote on Anthony Gordon last year said on the Friday that Gordon had not trained at any point, and then he started at 3 PM on the Saturday. This exact wording, it was almost word for word the same. So, could Isak play tomorrow? Yes, he could. But apparently it's actually a broken toe, someone suggested. So if he is genuinely struggling with this same toe injury, maybe he is genuinely down. Maybe he doesn't feature. But I don't think we can glean any information from an Eddie Howe press conference, sadly. So if you've got Isak, it's Man City anyway. I'd probably sell him. And if Isak is unavailable, it makes City defenders like Rico Lewis and Gvardiol, who we'll discuss a little bit later, much better options. On Brighton and João Pedro has pretty much been ruled out of Game Week 6, unless I've missed the quote. There are loads of people saying that he's definitely out. What I can see from Hertzler was he said João had some problems after the game. He still has some problems. I don't think he will be an option for the weekend, but he won't be out for so long, hopefully. I mean, by all accounts, it doesn't sound good. But unless I've missed the Hertzler quote where he says he's definitely out, he didn't say that. If you've already wildcarded and you can get away with benching João Pedro this week, and you've got transfers you need to use elsewhere, I don't think it's a huge issue keeping João Pedro on the bench until we get more information. But if you're on a wildcard, you definitely don't pick him. And if you've got free transfers to use, and maybe you can get to someone like a Chris Wood or even a Kai Havertz with an upgrade, then maybe you just make the move this week. So I can't, again, it's very, press conferences and managers are getting so vague now that there's not too much we can glean, but it does look very likely that João Pedro will be out for Game Week 6. Alisson, though, is expected to return to Game Week 6, which is a massive boost for the Liverpool defence. And we're going to discuss Wolves in a second, because Wolves have big issues at the moment with an illness going through their camp. But Alisson being back is a massive boost. If you've got Trent, if you've got Robinson, or if you've got Alisson himself, then they are all great options this week against Wolves. Another defensive return, this time with Branthwaite. So Jared Branthwaite is in contention to start in Game Week 6 after returning to action in a midweek game for the under-21s. I think Everton conceded 3 goals in that game, but Branthwaite played, I think, 90 minutes, and he looked very, very good. So that is great news for Branthwaite. He's back getting minutes, and I think if he's fit and available, he probably starts. Like, this is quite a big game against Palace for Everton. Like, Everton really need to start getting some results. And I just think with Branthwaite back, they're such a strong defence. Like, immediately, it really improves their defensive chances of getting a clean sheet. So it makes Eze a slightly weaker option, and it makes someone like a Mikalenko on wildcard a really decent one because Branthwaite is likely to be back. If he's not back this week, he should definitely be back for Game Week 7. Sadly for Man City and De Bruyne himself, De Bruyne has been ruled out of the Newcastle game. So on KDB's return, Pep said, I don't know. Maybe before the international break, maybe after. We will see. So again, nothing really. It does make Foden slightly likelier to start, but we have seen that Foden doesn't have to start because they've got other central players like Gundogan, Kovacic, Bernardo Silva, Rico Lewis. They can fill out those central roles without playing Foden. And then they've got the likes of Savio and Doku that can play on the wings, even a Grealish in there. So they don't need to play Foden, but it certainly makes it more likely that Foden would get minutes. You could take a punt if you wanted to. Again, we should get early team news on Saturday because City are the early kickoff. The big news for me, and I say this as someone that owns triple Liverpool and will be captaining Mohamed Salah, Wolves are a mess at the moment. So Mosquera is out with an ACL injury, which is massive. He's been their best defender this season. And also, apparently, according to O'Neill, we never know how true this is, but seems strange to lie. Apparently, there's quite a bit of illness going around the Wolves camp with players that will need to be checked. So there have been players that are missing training. There are rumours that there are a few defenders that are currently ill. And I saw a report, actually, I've got it next to me here, from Liam Keane, said a virus in the Wolves camp means several players may not be fit to start tomorrow. And academy defender Alfie Pond, never heard of him, but Alfie Pond could be in line to start. Alfie Pond might be fantastic, but as someone with Jota, Trent and Salah, and potentially for you guys, Luis Diaz, this is good news from an FPL perspective, right? That they've not only got injuries, but also illness. So listen, if you're looking to captain Salah like I am, this is good. If you're looking to bring in Luis Diaz, it's also good. And if you've got Trent, from an attacking and defensive perspective, it's probably good news. So, yeah, Wolves look a real mess at the moment, due to no fault of their own, of course, but illness and injury is not a good combination to go hand in hand. So, Gary O'Neill's going to have to perform some sort of masterclass in that game. And then finally on Spurs, Son went off midweek in Europe due to a knock. Apparently, he's going to be given every chance to play and he wants to train tomorrow. Remember, Spurs play against Man United at 4:30 p.m. on Sunday. So they will have a training session on the Saturday. Son wants to train. In the quote, Postecoglou said either tired or tight about his muscle, but I can't work out the accent. And I actually tried looking and people were reporting different words. But either way, it doesn't sound like a serious injury to Son. So if you've got Son, maybe wait for a bit more info, maybe going into Saturday. But he's also not been performing to a particularly high standard. So if you've got a free transfer to move him to like a Saka, I probably would. If Son is out, it obviously makes Solanke probably the penalty taker. And whilst I think I would rather from open play that Son's there if I own Solanke, obviously having him as a penalty taker on top of the underlying data that we've seen, that is fantastic. I mean, Maddison could take a penalty, by the way, but it would probably likely be Solanke. So I think those are the key press conference updates as of 3 p.m. on Friday. Again, if we get any more throughout Friday, I will discuss it on Saturday's deadline stream. And yeah, let me know if any of the press conference updates massively affect your team. So I think a lot of people this week, whether you're on wildcard or not, are probably looking at the best forwards to own in FPL, along with Erling Haaland, of course, whether you've got a João Pedro that you're looking to move on, or you've got Alexander Isak, or again, if you are on wildcard. It's not easy because actually there are quite a few options to choose from, which is wonderful. You've obviously got Kai Havertz, who's not going to be in this discussion here, but he's a good option. You've even got someone like a Welbeck you could still go for if you wanted to, but I think the four that most people are choosing from is probably Jackson and Solanke at that slightly more expensive price, and then you've got Calvert-Lewin and Wood at that slightly cheaper price. Obviously, that isn't it. The list isn't exhaustive here, but I think the four of them are probably up there as being some of my favourite options in the forward spot. So who do you go for? If you do have the money available, especially again if you're on a wild card to use for Jackson and Solanke, is it worth paying the premium? Like, you're paying almost 2 million more for someone like a Jackson or Solanke versus a Calvert-Lewin. It really comes down to, like, what do you look for from an FPL asset? And whilst I can say I think this player is the best, I might value penalties more than you. I might value fixtures less than you. I might value minutes more than you. Because each of these players obviously have issues associated with them, and they also have strengths as well. So I'll go through one by one and just kind of give the pros and cons, say why I like them and maybe why I like them slightly less. So with Chelsea and Jackson, the fixtures over the next two are decent because they're both at home. But do just note that Forest are defending very well. And they've kind of defended well for a while now. And Brighton, to some extent, aren't a bad defence. They were 8th last year for expected goals conceded. They're defending okay at points this season as well. So I look at the next two fixtures. They're not great fixtures, but they're also not awful. And I would still expect Chelsea to score goals. They then go to Anfield, which is not easy. Newcastle and United in 9 and 10 aren't bad fixtures. Then it's Arsenal at home. When you look at everyone's fixtures on this list out of all of the players, Chelsea's overall are probably the weakest, but the next two aren't terrible. So you could just take a punt on Jackson now. He's in form, he's scoring goals. Chelsea look pretty good as well. And maybe, if he does look fantastic over the next two, maybe you do keep him through the slightly trickier spell. Or you say, you know what, I'm having for 6 and 7 and I'm moving on from 8 onwards. But for me, the fixtures is the real thing that would put me off of Jackson. Also, his minutes aren't perfect. And I do think sooner rather than later, and I've said this for a couple of weeks now and it's not yet happened, so maybe I'm wrong, but I do think Nkunku will start one of the next 6 games ahead of Jackson in the league. I just think he will get a chance to show what he's about in the league from the start. And he has already said, Maresca, that he doesn't see Nkunku as a left, a right, or a number 10. He sees him as a number 9. So unless he's going to suddenly change the system and play with 2 9s, that would be instead of Jackson. So I don't dislike Jackson. His underlying data is strong. I feel like he has made a huge step up this season under Maresca. But there are a few doubts associated. And also he's the most expensive player out of the 4 that we're looking at here. So probably not my favourite, as you can tell, but I'm not going to talk anyone out of it, and he definitely will still get goals and chances over the next 6 games. For Solanke and Spurs, Solanke's up there as one of my favourites. He had 4 big chances in Game Week 5, and actually, Game Week 5, the amount of XG he accumulated is the most in a single game this season, outside of Erling Haaland, who's managed that twice this season, more than that. But if you ignore the robot that is Erling Haaland, Solanke had the highest XG of a single game this season, and he didn't even have a penalty, by the way. That was just open play goal threat. Spurs create chances. Solanke is the number 9. Solanke will take the chances he gets. He's also going to be a 90-minute man. He's played 89 minutes on average when he's played this season. So with Solanke, I think he is playing in an equally good attack. You could argue better or worse, but let's say equally good as Chelsea, and his minutes are better. I also slightly prefer Solanke in terms of like an actual, I think he's more likely to finish the chances. I think he's slightly more clinical. And then when I look at the fixtures overall, over the next 2, I would say they're relatively even maybe slightly better given that United are not particularly good defensively. But then from Game Week 8 onwards, you've got West Ham, Palace, Villa, Ipswich. I just think that's a slightly better set of fixtures than the Chelsea ones, because the Liverpool and Arsenal game just put me off having Jackson. So I think minutes are better, fixtures are better, underlying data is virtually identical for the 2 of them this season. I think I just slightly prefer Solanke, and also the knock to Heung-min Son, whether he plays or not, I'm not yet sure. That might mean that Solanke gets full share of penalties as well. And if Solanke's on penalties, then he's an absolute almost no-brainer for me ahead of Jackson, because that's yet another thing that's an advantage for him. He could even take penalties when Son's on the pitch, by the way. We still don't know that. So for me, I just think Solanke's got a little bit more. And I feel like if you go for Jackson, you really do need Jackson to probably massively outscore Solanke in Game Week 6 and 7, because from 8, you probably prefer to have Solanke in your team. So out of those 2 more expensive players, I do prefer Solanke. But the issue is you've got Calvert-Lewin and Wood, who are significantly cheaper than Jackson and Solanke, but are definitely on penalties, and also start every game for their teams, and also have really good fixtures. Whether I prefer Calvert-Lewin or Wood, I might slightly prefer Calvert-Lewin, and people won't agree with that, and that's absolutely fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, because Calvert-Lewin's minutes are better, firstly. They both start every game. but Wood is more likely to get sort of a 70-minute sub for me. And I also think the fixtures are stronger. And when I say who is a better attack, Everton or Forest, people will laugh at this. I don't think Forest are much better than Everton, if at all, from an attacking perspective. Defensively, 100%, I'd rather have a Forest defender, probably based on what we've seen. Although with these fixtures, I just think fixtures combined with slightly better minutes, I probably slightly prefer Calvert-Lewin. But Wood is very close behind. And the thing that you've got with Wood is he doesn't get many chances, but when he does, they tend to be extremely clear-cut big chances, and I like that with an asset. I like that he's not taking tons of shots. He just gets tap-ins and headers and easy goals, and it frustrates you when you don't own him, because you're like, he's not even played well, he's just scored a tap-in. The amount of times I've said that of Chris Wood. I open SofaScore, Chris Wood scored, and I'm like, he's not even played well. And then you watch the highlights, and he's been rubbish, but he scores goals, and that's what he does. So I think they're both great, and I can definitely foresee a world where Haaland, Calvert-Lewin and Wood is arguably the best front three when you're looking at value combined. But if I'm now to put this together, I would say that the ideal sort of two here to couple with Haaland, if you're choosing two of these here, is probably just about Solanke is my favourite out of the four, then closely followed by Calvert-Lewin, then Wood, then Jackson. And it's not disrespecting Jackson, it's just taking into account price and fixtures. There's obviously a shout to go for someone like a Watkins instead, who is quite a bit more expensive, but Watkins has been sensational this season in terms of the chances he's getting, and the fixtures are there, and he's very reliable, and also Kai Havertz as well. So it's not just the four of them. Also Ndiaye, I've seen lots of people mentioning loads of players that I've not even discussed here, but if it is out of these four, which for a lot of people it is, for me it's Solanke and Calvert-Lewin. Let me know if you disagree in the comments. So lots of people asking questions about Rico Lewis and a few questions about Gvardiol as well. And that's understandable given that City are traditionally a very good defence. And with the fixtures coming up, and especially a lot of people on wildcard, they're thinking, can I squeeze a sub 5 million Man City asset into my team in obviously Rico Lewis? And also is Gvardiol still worth that premium price tag? And even to some extent, someone like an Ederson. I will just start by saying, I've got no idea with Man City, and I've now been creating content on YouTube for over 3 seasons. I always try to pretend I can predict Man City, and I come up with these clever explanations about why Foden's preferred in this position and why this player is undroppable. And even back to the Mahrez days of trying to predict when he was... We just don't know. Like, Pep just does what he wants. I remember, was it last season or the season before? Foden started the first 10 or 11 games of the season and played 90 minutes in 9 of them. And then everyone brought him in on a wild card, and then he was benched 3 games in a row despite not being injured. And then people were like, has he fallen out with Pep? And Pep was like, no, just, changes to the team. So it happens. And even at the start of the season, people are like, Gvardiol is so nailed, and the injury to Ake makes Gvardiol more nailed. And then he goes and gets benched, and then he comes on at half-time, I think it was, for Rico Lewis. So basically, no one actually knows. So anyone that tries to pretend they fully do, we don't. But of course, I can try and theorise and help you out a little bit. So firstly, are City defence worth investing in, even with the injury to Rodri? Because we know traditionally they struggle more with Rodri. Absolutely, because this season they have shown that they are still strong defensively without Rodri. So Rodri's obviously only played in the Arsenal game, and we have now seen that across the season thus far, City are the best defence for expected goals conceded. They have now surpassed Liverpool as the best defence so far this season in terms of the quantity of chances that they're giving up, and also the quality as well. And yes, they still somehow find a way to concede, and I don't know how they do it. I do just think Ederson is not a great shot stopper personally, and I think that lets them down quite often as well. Like, I feel like if you chuck Alisson in goal for City, the number of clean sheets they keep is so much higher. They would struggle more on the ball, and that is why Ederson is so fantastic for City, because he's so good on the ball. But the one chance that they concede every game, Ederson does find a way to concede it. So I get that, but I just think you've got, at the very worst case situation, the third, even at top 3 best defences in the league, going into a fixture run with Fulham, Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth, Brighton. I'm wildcarding next week. I'll be extremely surprised if I don't have one of Rico Lewis, Gvardiol, or Ederson, or potentially 2 of them. And I actually think a double up is viable. And I know Rodri being out, we've not seen it over a large spell how that might affect City. But over the opening 4 or 5 games, it doesn't look to have massively impacted them from a defensive perspective. And they've not had easy fixtures either. Going into a much easier fixture run now, you'd expect that they won't need him as much from a defensive perspective, and they have other players that can fill in. Now, a question that people are asking is Rico Lewis likely to be more nailed with Rodri out? I absolutely think he will get better minutes, because what City need, as much as the defensive and physical capability of Rodri, which is important, is that technical ability in the midfield. And yes, they have Kovacic, yes, they've got Bernardo Silva, but Rico Lewis has shown that he can do it very well. And the only game that Rico Lewis hasn't started this season, and it might have just been a coincidence, is the one that Rodri started against Arsenal. So I look at it and I just think, yeah, based on what we've seen this season, Rico Lewis did a very good... I know he's not doing the same role as Rodri, by the way, but he did a very good job in the absence of Rodri. Rodri comes in, Lewis drops out. Now Rodri's injured. Yeah, you probably would expect Rico Lewis's minutes to be slightly better. Regarding, is he nailed? No. No City defender is nailed. Even like Ruben Diaz, we always say, oh, I think he's... No one is nailed in that City defence apart from Ederson. So if you want a nailed City defender, go for Ederson. So no, he's not nailed. No, Gvardiol's not nailed. I spoke to a few different City fans, and I also listened to Luke on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, his opinion on Man City. Every City fan I've spoken to seems to think Gvardiol is more nailed on than Lewis. But I wouldn't expect either of them to start the next 6, 7, 8 games. They're going to miss at least one game. So then the question is, if you only get 4 of the Fulham, Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth and Brighton from these two, which I think they'll both probably benched in one of them, is it still worth it? Yeah, you're still getting 4 fixtures that are really decent for one of the best defences in the league. So I think both Rico Lewis and Gvardiol, yes, are worth it. Rodri being out isn't ideal, and I do think it will make them slightly weaker defensively, but it wouldn't put me off enough. As to who I would go for right this second, if money was no object, Gvardiol would be there instead of Rico Lewis, because I just think longer term, and remember, especially on a wild card, you need to build for the long term. Gvardiol, long term, I expect his minutes to be better. But in the short term, because the fixtures are right now, it's difficult to look past Rico Lewis because it does look like he's probably going to continue to start. The only final thing I would say is Man City are the early kickoff in Game Week 6. So as a result, we're probably very likely to get a team leak. So make sure to tune into my deadline stream tomorrow. And if we get a leak about Gvardiol and or Lewis starting, I know this isn't the fixture you necessarily want them for, but it might make you a little bit more confident moving forward if one of them starts and one of them is benched, and it might make the decision a little bit easier for you. So let me know down below what you think. If you are on your wildcard, if you're using your transfers, let me know what you're going to do. I will just say actually one more thing, because I think this is also important, is the cover that you have. Don't bring in Rico Lewis or even Gvardiol to some extent if you've got 2 4 million defenders on the bench. And on wildcard, if you're taking a punt on Gvardiol or Lewis, do not have a really weak bench with no defensive cover. Make sure that you've got a very solid 4.5 defender that if Lewis does lose his place and gets benched 2 weeks in a row, you're not forced to take him out straight away because you've got some decent cover instead. That's it. I'll leave it there. I like the idea of a Man City defender, and I think I'll probably have at least one on my wildcard next week. So I did have a few questions throughout the week around Cole Palmer and people asking why I'm not speaking about him. Like, is he the forgotten man? Like, why is he not on more wildcard drafts? And obviously the straight up answer is he's just very expensive. 10.6 or 10.5 million. It's an expensive price for a player that doesn't really have the fixtures. And apart from in one game this season has really failed to massively impress us. And obviously he's set very high standards for himself based on what you saw last year. So that's the straight up answer, is he's expensive and the fixtures aren't perfect. But I did just want to give you a little bit more justification as to why a lot of managers, especially content creators, aren't massively considering Cole Palmer, is there's just been a little bit of a drop-off based on what we saw last season. And I'm not saying Cole Palmer is just a penalty merchant, but it does feel a little bit like the penalties have dried up, and it's kind of shown that without the penalties last season, he would have still been unbelievable, but he wouldn't have been quite that special. And he did have a lot of penalties, like something like 10 or 11 penalties in the Premier League. And he could get a nice run of taking penalties now and getting like 3 penalties in the next 3, as well as extra returns. And obviously having penalties is an advantage. I don't want you to see it as a disadvantage. But what I've got on your screen is stats from the 23-24 season for Palmer, and then from the 24-25 season. So in the 23-24 season, and again, this is a very small sample size, I'm aware of that, but he was averaging 1.78 shots in the box per 90. That's dropped to 0.87. So 1 less shot in the box per 90. Across a season, that's 38 less shots in the box. That's quite a lot. And again, small sample, maybe that'll improve slightly, but Chelsea have had okay fixtures as well. It's not even necessarily that the fixtures have been bad. He appears to be playing more of a withdrawn role for me. And that is shown by also touches in the box per 90. So 4.8 touches in the box per 90, which by the way isn't even that high. Like Salah in previous seasons has had like 10. Saka in one of the last 2 seasons had like 12 touches in the box per 90. So Palmer's never been necessarily one that gets lots of touches in the box. But that's dropped from 4.8 per 90 to 1.95. That's a big drop off. And also, even his underlying data in terms of expected data has had a small, but enough of a drop-off to say it's not ideal. His expected assists have gone down from 0.28 to 0.23 per 90, and his expected goals non-penalty has dropped from 0.35 to 0.27. I was actually surprised that it's not a massive drop-off. So we're not talking like he's disastrous now, he's no longer an option. But when we're looking at overall in the landscape of the Premier League at the moment, there's not as many penalties. Cole Palmer is playing more of a systematic. He's part of a greater system in the role that he's playing in the team at the moment. He's got less assist threat. He's got less goal threat so far. He's not getting as involved in the box. And with the fixtures coming up, I think he's rightly being not ignored, but having other players chosen ahead of him. Like, you can't sit. He could outscore Saka, by the way, but you can't sit there and tell me that Palmer is a better option than Saka over the next two. And then I would even point to someone like Ollie Watkins, who is like 1.5, 1.6 million less. I know he's in a different position, but I'd rather go for a Watkins if I'm going for another premium asset and switch to a 3-4-3 than I would go for Cole Palmer even alongside a Bukayo Saka. So yeah, I have no disrespect towards Palmer. He's an exceptional footballer. And will he still get returns over the next 6? Yeah, I reckon he'll get at least 4 or 5 returns, but that's not enough to justify the price tag. So I think he's rightly being overlooked. But if you do want to go for a punt on him, you absolutely can. You need to see better, especially gold threat, but you just need him a bit more involved in the action. So there are obviously lots of questions about which Arsenal assets to own, double defence versus double attack. And I've pretty much been saying all week that in an ideal world, you would own 3. And I think most people would accept that in an ideal world, if you had all of the transfers and all of the options and all of the money, you would have 3 Arsenal assets for Leicester at home and Southampton at home. But it's not that simple, because by choosing Arsenal assets, you're obviously missing out on others. And for anyone that's not on a wildcard, you've obviously looking at transfers as well, most likely to bring those assets in. And in that case, you're probably selling very good assets as well. For some people, it's selling Salah for Saka. For some people, they're selling Robertson to bring in a Gvardiol or Saliba. So I'm also getting a few questions like, can we look elsewhere? Like, is it insane to go into Game Week 6 without 2 or 3 Arsenal? And honestly, no. Like, no player in FPL is essential. Haaland is about as close as it gets. But I have just seen, by the way, someone sent me their team, their top 100k, and they've not owned Haaland this season. And whilst that's not very common, like most people have been battered by no Haaland, it goes to show that if you nail the other players, you nail captaincy, etc., and you get a few differential returns, like, you don't have to always own the players that other people do. So there's no such thing as an essential player. There's no such thing as an essential team to invest in. I can't remember when it was. It was a long while ago now, when Liverpool were pretty dominant, to be fair. There was a guy that won FPL, was an Everton fan, that didn't own a single Liverpool player. So there are ways you can play it, but yeah, in an ideal world you would, but no, it's not crazy to only go in with 1 or 2, because you have to remember, like, other players score points, and this is such an obvious point, but we'll get so fixated on a team, and we'll hone in so much on saying Arsenal are amazing, you need to own 3, that we forget that if you had someone like a Robertson instead of Gvardiol, could Robertson outscore Gvardiol this week? Absolutely he could. I'm not saying he necessarily will, or I would expect him to, but he has the capability to do so. If you've got Salah, could Salah outscore Saka? I'd arguably prefer Salah this week. And I know money comes into it, of course, at that point. But I guess what I'm saying is the alternatives that you have to your Arsenal assets are probably very good players. So you don't have to force them out of your team. But I do think if you're on a wildcard, I don't think it's strange to go without, because like, you're entitled to play however you want. And on my channel, I try not to tell people there's only one way to play. But I do think it would be, in my opinion, probably wouldn't be the best way to play to go without Arsenal altogether. But could you go for 1 or 2 and leave the Arsenal options open to see where you want to head in the future? Absolutely, because that also does leave you very flexible as well. Like, if you went for Gvardiol and Saka and then left that third slot open because you might want to go to a Havertz in the future, or if Arsenal do continue to impress, maybe you want to go for a Saliba or a Raya, and when we get more info about Raya, you can obviously decide if you want to move there. Or it might be that Martinelli like nails down a starting slot in the 11 and it's just brilliant, or Trossard like is also very flexible to leave that third one open. And then obviously if you aren't convinced and you are a bit hesitant, you've only put 2 of your positions in your team into Arsenal, you've not fully invested in 3 of them. So yeah, I mean, it's up to you how you want to play the game. That is something that I really want to drive home. I guarantee there'll be someone that gets a green arrow this week without any Arsenal, even if Arsenal win 5 or 6-0, because there are so many other players that always get points. So as long as your alternatives do very well, great. But if your alternatives are like massive risks from poor teams that don't have good minutes, at that stage, it's like I'd probably just have an Arsenal player instead. So on a wildcard, I would have at least Gvardiol and Saka. That would be the bare minimum for me. And then as to whether I did have a Havertz or took a risk on Raya, I think that's up to you at that stage. I'd love to know down below, how many Arsenal assets will you have for Game Week 6 and who are they? So guys, as always, I'll finish this video by going through what my current plans are with my team ahead of the deadline. But of course, do tune into my deadline stream tomorrow to see my final team and plans and to see if any early team news, which we might get, might affect my team. But believe it or not, despite not owning Haaland, I am currently planning on rolling the transfer, and then I am planning on wildcarding in Game Week 7. I don't have to, though, because if I do roll the transfer this week, I'll have 2 free transfers next week, and I can sell Watkins and Salah for Mbeumo and Haaland. And that would give me close-ish, enough at least, to what the wildcard would be, because I would have Calvert-Lewin, who is a very decent cheap forward, I think at least anyway. Haaland in there. I would have Mbeumo. Eze's absolutely fine, by the way. I'd have Saka. A lot of people have Rodgers. And I've got Gabriel and Trent. And also Pedro Porro from next week is fine as well. It would really only be, I don't love that I would have Henderson and Eze starting against Liverpool. So that would be my only concern, and the only two spots where I would say it was massively off what a wildcard would be. So there is a small part of me that's even tempted to delay the wildcard a bit more, but don't worry, next week, regardless of what happens, Haaland will be in the team. So yeah, I don't feel like I need the wildcard this week, given that we think Jota's probably going to start, but if we get a leak that he doesn't, I still won't wildcard, but I'd have to take him out. I've got Saka and Gabriel in place. And Salah this week against a team that is full of injury and illness in Wolves, it feels like a fine alternative to Haaland. Obviously, if I had Haaland, I'd probably captain him. And I'm not saying he's a bad captain, but I don't know. I just look at the team and I'm not that desperate to make a transfer. I think the key decision for me will be, do I definitely want to captain Salah rather than Saka? And I think I do. I'm a bit of a Salah fanboy, and I just think he's going to be a real differential option. So if I think Saka and Salah are basically 50-50, and I think it is very close, I'm always going to lean to the slightly more differential option. Even if I'm ranked like second in the world, I would still do that, by the way. It's just the way that I play the game. And also, I still think Salah's a slightly better asset. So, yeah, I think I'll captain Salah. And then Robinson versus Pedro Porro is something that I've been going back and forth on. I think Pedro Porro is the slightly better asset, and I don't think either keep a clean sheet this week. So if neither keep a clean sheet, go for the slightly better, more attacking asset. And I just think Pedro Porro is, I feel like returns are impending for Pedro Porro. I do have the one free transfer this week still to use, by the way. I've got 3 million in the bank. So I do have options. And on the deadline stream, if we get early team news that one of my players isn't starting, then of course I might end up moving them out. But yeah, I think at the moment, roll the transfer, wildcard in 7, which would mean from GameWeek 8 onwards, I've got 2 free transfers, bring in Haaland. And the only thing for me, this is a bit of a teaser for the GameWeek 7 wildcard, I might try and get Haaland and Salah in. But I think I'd have to drop Saka, which people won't like. But part of me doesn't want to lose Salah. Even with good team value, it's very difficult to get Salah, Saka, and Haaland in a balanced team, as well as having Trent and Arsenal defence. So something's got to give if I decide to try and keep Salah in there. It will not be at the expense of Haaland. It would be in addition to Haaland. Because Salah's just such a monster, and so many people are overlooking him. Obviously, Luis Diaz is fantastic. But I don't feel like Diaz is an alternative to Salah moving forward. I feel like he's a nice addition. So part of me does want to try and keep the Egyptian king. So I'll be thinking about it. But anyway, that's the plan at the moment. Roll the transfer, wildcard in 7, and there should be a wildcard draft probably on Monday on my channel. So if you're also on a GameWeek 7 wildcard or you're considering it, make sure to subscribe to check that out. And let me know what you think of my team down below in the comments as well. So guys, there you have it. That is my deadline decisions video. Hopefully it was helpful for you. And as always, if it was, please do smash that like button. Let's try and hit 1,500 likes on this video, and make sure to subscribe as well. I do really appreciate the support. Until next time, which will be my live stream tomorrow, I'll see you then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.